The forests of Hadrian's Edge didn't grow naturally. Every tree, every shrub, every carefully calibrated ecosystem had been engineered and planted over decades of terraforming. Dr. Elias Crane appreciated the irony. He'd fled human civilization to live among nature that was just as artificial as the cities he'd left behind. His homestead sat in a valley where three engineered rivers met, creating a microclimate perfect for the hybrid gardens he maintained. Research, he called it, though he hadn't published findings in 3 years. Mostly he cataloged plant variations, maintained his equipment, and tried not to think about the life he'd left behind on new Terra. 5 years since the accident. 5 years since he'd watched rescue teams pull wreckage from the transport that should have been routine, that should have brought his wife and daughter home safely. 5 years of telling himself that isolation was healing, that solitude was what he needed. He'd almost convinced himself it was true. The discovery came at dawn, when Elias was checking his perimeter sensors. Something large had triggered the motion detection near the eastern boundary, probably one of the native hexapods that occasionally wandered through. He grabbed his field kit and headed out, more from routine than concern. She was collapsed at the tree line, her body curled against the base of an engineered oak. Elias stopped, his mind taking several seconds to process what he was seeing. Vel'shara, female, from the body structure. Young, maybe equivalent to mid-20s in human terms. Her bioluminescent markings were so dim they were barely visible, and her breathing was shallow. And on her left arm, stark against pale skin, a symbol that looked like it had been burned into her flesh. His medical training, limited but sufficient for frontier living, took over. He checked her pulse, assessed her level of consciousness, noted signs of severe dehydration and malnutrition. She needed help immediately. Elias got her onto the transport sled he'd brought for equipment, secured her carefully, and headed back to the homestead at maximum speed. His mind was already running through what supplies he had. IV fluids, yes. Nutrient supplements, adequate. Knowledge of Vel'shara physiology, minimal, but he had access to medical databases. He got her inside into his medical bay, really just a converted storage room with basic equipment, and started treatment. IV line in, fluids running, vital signs monitored. She was alive, but barely. It took 6 hours before her eyes opened. When they did, the fear in them was absolute. "Hey," Elias said softly, keeping his distance. "You're safe. I'm not going to hurt you." She stared at him, her long ears pressed flat against her skull. Terror, his limited knowledge of Vel'shara body language told him. She tried to speak, but her voice was too weak. "Don't try to talk yet. You're severely dehydrated. The IV will help, but you need rest." He gestured to the medical equipment. "I'm a doctor. Well, botanist technically, but I have medical training. You collapsed near my property. I brought you here." Her eyes moved to the doorway, calculating escape routes. "You're not a prisoner," Elias added. "When you're strong enough to leave, you can, but right now you need recovery time." Over the next 2 days, she regained strength slowly. Elias learned that his translator software struggled with her dialect. She was from a settlement far from the regions where humans usually encountered Vel'shara. But gradually, they managed communication. Her name was Serath. The symbol on her arm was called the mark of emptiness. She was barren, unable to bear children, and in Vel'shara culture, that made her existence intolerable. "My people cast out those who cannot contribute to future generations," she explained on the evening of the 2nd day, her voice still weak but functional. "The marked are expelled from settlements. We are not killed directly, but we are given no resources, no aid. Most die within weeks." Elias sat across from her, trying to process the cruelty of what she was describing. "They just abandon you because of something you can't control. It is our way. Resources are precious. Those who cannot bear children cannot justify their consumption." Her ears tilted slightly, resignation. "I do not expect you to understand. Your people do not operate this way." "You're right, I don't understand. That's barbaric." Perhaps, but it is the only culture I have known. She looked at him with something between curiosity and confusion. Why did you help me? You are human, I am marked. Even my own people would not touch me. Because you needed help, Elias said simply. That seems like reason enough. Serath's bioluminescent markings flickered slightly. Surprise, he thought, though he wasn't certain. You live alone here. By choice. Choice? The concept seemed to genuinely puzzle her. Among my people, solitude is the worst punishment. You chose this. I had my reasons. Elias stood, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. You should rest more. Tomorrow, if you're feeling stronger, I'll show you around. You're welcome to stay as long as you need. That night, Elias lay awake thinking about what Serath had told him. A culture that discarded people for circumstances beyond their control. It was horrifying, but he'd studied enough xenoanthropology to know that judging alien cultures by human standards was complicated. Still, leaving people to die in the wilderness seemed pretty unambiguously wrong by any reasonable metric. He was preparing breakfast the next morning when his perimeter sensors triggered again. This time, 2 contacts approaching from the south. Elias checked the visual feed and felt something in his chest tighten. 2 more Vel'shara women, both bearing the same mark on their arms, walking toward his homestead with the careful steps of people who expected death at any moment. Serath appeared beside him looking at the screen, her ears tilted forward recognition. They heard, she said quietly. Heard what? That a human sheltered one of the marked. Word spreads among us even in exile. We have networks. Ways of communicating that our people don't know about. She looked at him. They came hoping you would show them the same mercy. Elias watched the 2 women approach, saw the hope mixed with fear in their body language, and thought about the quiet life he'd built here. The isolation he'd maintained, the careful distance from anything that might hurt. Then he thought about turning these women away to die in the wilderness. I need to expand the sleeping quarters, he said. Serath's markings brightened slightly, something that might have been hope. You will shelter them. Apparently, he moved toward the door. Come on, let's meet them before they collapse on my doorstep. The 2 new arrivals were named Lyrana and Maris. Lyrana was angular and intense, her markings flickering with barely suppressed anger. Maris was smaller, quieter, moving like she was trying to take up as little space as possible. Both had the mark of emptiness. Both had been cast out. Both had survived on minimal resources and maximal desperation until they heard rumors of a human who'd sheltered one of their kind. Elias fed them, set them up in hastily converted storage areas, and tried not to think about how his carefully maintained isolation had just quadrupled in population. Serath helped the new arrivals adjust, explaining Elias' household rules, which were mostly don't die and help with the gardens if you're able. The dynamic was awkward, 4 people who didn't quite know how to be around each other, but it was functional. For 3 days, they established a rhythm. Elias taught them to help with his research gardens. Lyrana took to the physical labor with aggressive efficiency. Maris worked quietly but competently. Serath mediated between them all, the one with the most experience in Elias' strange household. Then the 4th one arrived. Her name was Talzara, and she was different from the others. She carried herself with a bearing that spoke of former status, and when she explained her story, Elias understood why. I was nobility, she said, accepting the food Elias offered with hands that shook slightly. 3rd daughter of the High Matriarch. When my barrenness was confirmed, I lost everything in a single day. Status, family, name. The mark was burned into my arm, and I was escorted beyond the settlement borders. How long have you been in exile? Serath asked. 43 days. Talzara's voice was hollow. I thought I would die with dignity. Instead, I survived long enough to hear rumors of a human who shelters the marked. I hoped. You hoped correctly, Elias said, already mentally rearranging living space again. There's room. It's tight, but there's room. That night, Serath found him sitting on the porch. staring at the stars with an expression she'd learned to recognize. Overwhelmed, she sat beside him without asking permission. "You are troubled. I'm housing 4 exiled Vel'shara women in a homestead designed for one person. Troubled is one word for it. You could have turned us away." "I couldn't actually. Apparently I'm not capable of that." He looked at her. "How does this work long-term, realistically? I can't just keep expanding my homestead every time someone shows up." "You may not have to." Serath's ears tilted in a complex expression he couldn't read. "There is something you should know. By sheltering 4 marked women under one roof, you have invoked the Rite of Renewal." "The what?" "An ancient law among my people, created centuries ago when we were fewer and survival required. Flexibility. The law states that any who shelter 4 or more of the marked become a new family unit, recognized by all Vel'shara legal traditions. You didn't just give us shelter, Elias. You gave us legal standing again. We are your family now by ancient law." Elias processed this. "I'm human, I'm not even Vel'shara. How can their law apply to me?" "The law specifies the act, not the species. You perform the act. The law recognizes you." She paused. "This will have consequences. My people do not react well when their traditions are invoked by outsiders, especially not traditions that restore status to those they have cast out." "Consequences," Elias repeated. "What kind of consequences?" "The kind that may put all of us in danger, but also the kind that may change how my people treat the Barren. If a human can understand the value of our ancient laws better than we do." She trailed off. They sat in silence, watching the engineered forest sway in the night breeze. "I came here to be alone," Elias said quietly. "After my wife and daughter died, I thought isolation was the only way to avoid more loss. And now I have 4 Vel'shara women living in my storage rooms, and apparently I've accidentally invoked ancient alien law." He smiled slightly. "I'm terrible at isolation." Serath's markings brightened amusement. "Yes, you are." 3 weeks later, the delegation arrived. Elias watched the Vel'shara shuttle land on his cleared field with a sense of inevitability. He'd known this was coming. Serath had warned him. What surprised him was how calm he felt. The matriarch who emerged from the shuttle was named Serath, and her presence was commanding. She moved toward the homestead with the confidence of someone who'd never been denied anything in her life. Elias met her at the door, his 4 family members standing behind him. "Dr. Crane," Serath said, her standard perfect. "We need to discuss your unauthorized invocation of Vel'shara law." "Unauthorized?" Elias kept his voice level. "I thought the law specified the act, not who performs it." Serath's ears tilted backward, displeasure. "You shelter the marked. That is your right, misguided though it may be. But to claim family status under our ancient laws—" "I didn't claim anything. Your law did that automatically. The Rite of Renewal was created for Vel'shara families, not human interlopers who misunderstand our culture." "I understand your culture fine. You cast out people for circumstances they can't control, and your ancient laws include provisions to restore them because somewhere in your history, your ancestors were wiser than you are now." The confrontation escalated from there. Serath arguing tradition and social order, Elias arguing basic decency and legal precedent. Neither convinced the other, but when Serath left, her final warning was clear. "There are those among my people who would prefer to see this experiment ended, permanently." The human authorities arrived next, politely concerned about interstellar relations. Elias' response to their suggestion that he release the women back to Vel'shara custody was unprintable enough that the frontier representative filed a formal complaint. The assassination attempt came on a quiet evening 3 days later. 3 Vel'shara mercenaries, hired by traditionalist factions. They didn't succeed. Between Elias' knowledge of his own property, the 4 women's survival instincts honed by exile, and a well-timed intervention by frontier security who'd been monitoring the situation, the mercenaries were captured. But the attempt made clear, this wasn't going away. Through all of it, the political pressure, the threats, the danger, Serath watched Elias refuse every easy exit. She saw him laugh with Lyrana over dinner, patiently teach Maris to read Standard, listen to Talzara's stories about the life she'd lost. She saw him become the family they'd all lost when the mark of emptiness severed them from their people. And she made her choice. When the Vel'shara offered her the deal, testify against Elias, claim coercion, break the family apart in exchange for limited citizenship, Serath refused. More than refused. She made a public statement, transmitted across both human and Vel'shara networks. Dr. Elias Crane sheltered us when we were dying. He gave us dignity when our people gave us nothing. If the Vel'shara cannot accept that someone outside our species understands the value of our ancient laws better than we do, then perhaps those laws need new guardians. We stand with him. We are family, by choice and by law. And we will not be cast out again. Her statement went viral. Public opinion shifted. Pressure built on Vel'shara leadership. Slowly, grudgingly, the matriarchs conceded the legal standing of Elias' family. Other exiled Vel'shara began arriving, asking for shelter. Elias, working with human settlement authorities, established a formal sanctuary, a place where the marked could build new lives. The homestead became the heart of something larger than any of them had anticipated. Months later, Elias stood on his expanded porch, watching his 4 daughters, as he'd started thinking of them, working in the gardens. They argued about cultivation techniques, teased each other about cooking, and generally behaved like family. Messy, complicated, real. Serath found him there as the sun set, painting the engineered forests in impossible colors. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Finding me, taking us in, disrupting your peaceful isolation?" Elias thought about his answer. 5 years ago, he'd come here to hide from pain. These 4 women had dragged him back into life, into purpose, into caring again. "Not even for a second," he said. Then, with a slight smile, "Though I do regret not building a bigger house originally. We desperately need more bathrooms." Serath laughed, her bioluminescent markings bright with genuine joy, something she'd thought she'd never experience again after receiving the mark of emptiness. The barren alien woman who'd expected to die in the wilderness had found something better than survival. She'd found home, and so had the lonely human who'd thought isolation was the only way to avoid more loss. Sometimes family isn't about blood or biology. Sometimes it's about the choice to shelter those who have nowhere else to go, the courage to invoke ancient laws that restore dignity, and the stubborn refusal to abandon people who need help. Elias Crane learned that lesson when one exiled woman became 4, when compassion became family, and when a quiet homestead on a frontier world became a sanctuary for the forsaken. The Rite of Renewal had bound them by law. Love chosen, earned, built through shared meals and shared danger, bound them by something deeper, and that was enough.